That's not mine, is it? How is that on there? Okay, good.
Maharaj, if you don't mind, we just move the table.
Yeah.
That's all, that's all.
Blocking, is it?
No, 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 no.
No, it's not now.
Okay, start.
2-3 minutes.
Huh?
Breakfast is a little late for that.
Oh, I see.
Many of them will be joining.
So anyone ask some questions, they can ask. Previously, 2-3 questions.
Maharaj, actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
But it's not really related to.
Doesn't matter. It's okay.
In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it talks about, it predicts the advent of the Buddha. I understand of late that Buddha referred to in Srimad Bhagavatam is apparently not the Buddha that of the Gautama Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha. So I just like to seek clarification, Maharaj, as to which Buddha does the Srimad Bhagavatam refer to? Is it Shakyamuni Buddha?
Yeah.
The Buddhist
Yeah,
belief?
yeah.
Or is it some other Buddha by the name of Gautam?
Yeah.
Gautam, Buddha or Gautam Muni?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Maharaj.
Yeah, well, there's two descriptions, mentions of Buddha there, and one it talks about Gaia, etc., which seems to be more or less the same Buddha, but some details are different. The other one is in the second canto, it talks about a Buddha when there's spaceships flying in the sky, which is like a different Buddha. So it doesn't, but then the acharyas don't really comment on that. And none of our acharyas have really said that this is the Buddha that we know. But Bhaktivinoda Nodes, Thakur, he more or less takes it as that Buddha, the Gautama Buddha that we know. Yeah. But I think Keshav Maharaj, the Gaudiya Bhatt, wrote a book and says it's a different Buddha. Our Buddha is different from that one, so I know, a little controversy there. But our acharyas don't really mention which Buddha it is.
Actually a debate towards
Yeah, somewhat ambiguous. Yeah.
So how do we explain to the, I mean, when they pose a question like this, how
Yeah,
do we
yeah.
respond?
Yeah. Well, normally we just say the Buddha, the one who stopped animal sacrifices or whatever like that, nonviolence. So that kind of fits with the Buddha we know. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I add, can I add to this answer, Maharaj?
Yeah.
There are different, what you call, explanation about Vishnu Avatar Buddha. Like in the Sri Lankan Leela Avatar Sutra, they mention about a different kind of Buddhas. Maitreya Buddha who will appear in future.
Oh yeah, there's many Buddhas, yeah.
Then there is Bodhisattva Buddha. And then there's Adi Buddha, they call Adi Buddha, who is the original Buddha.
Historical one.
Yeah, so they say the Adi Buddha is the Vishnu Avatar Buddha who appeared 5,000 years ago at the beginning of Kali Yuga.
Mhm.
Whereas the Sakyamuni Gautama Buddha, he appeared 2,500 years ago in Nepal.
Yeah, so he's a different one.
Yes, a different one.
Not the real
Whereas
Buddha?
the original Buddha appeared in Bodha, in Bodha, in what do you call it, Gaya, under the Bodhi tree.
Yeah.
And that is why Gautama Rishi, he came to Gaya and he sat under the Bodhi tree
Okay.
where Vishnu Avatar Buddha was born.
Okay.
Because he knew this is a holy place.
Okay. So it's two Buddhas.
Yeah, the two Buddhas.
Okay, according to that.
They were different. But he appeared 5,000 years ago.
Hmm.
At the beginning, which is mentioned in Bhagavatam book, at the beginning of Kali Yuga he will appear.
Hmm.
So the timing is different and the name is also different, Maharaj.
Mhm.
That's why he's known as Sakyamuni. Because Sakya refers to the Nepal dynasty. So that's why he's known as Sakyamuni.
Hmm.
Many evidence are there to show the differences.
Okay, I guess we can start. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Buddha De Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Prasdacharya Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is a presentation of some of the contents of Tattva Sandarbha, a work by Jiva Goswami, the first of the Sandarbhas. The Sandarbhas generally deal with Tattva, that is, truth, or principles, basic principles, which are fundamental to our practices. So we have different Sandarbhas for different things, but this first Sandarbha is a definition of knowledge or epistemology. How do we derive our knowledge? So this is basically what this does. Once we have established where we get our knowledge from, then we consult that source of knowledge and we get all the other information in the other Sandarbhas. So if this is, of course, is also fundamental for any philosophy and any religious movement. They have to have a source of knowledge. Okay? So usually they will choose some sort of scripture like the Bible or the Quran, whatever. That's our authority. So they have a source of knowledge. So, and in philosophy also, there's a discussion of what is knowledge and how do we get knowledge, etc., with more abstract. But nevertheless, without that discussion, then we can't even establish knowledge unless we know where it comes from.
Maharaj, can we have a little higher volume?
Hare Krishna.
Volume.
Volume.
How much closer I had to get? Eat their microphone.
Maybe you can increase in the sound system.
No, otherwise it hums. It's only problem.
Okay. So, all of this, of course, is
Very good.
in relation to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is, we say, the founder of the Gaudiya movement that's continuing till today. And this, of course, is illustrated by a proof from the Srimad Bhagavatam itself. So in the Bhagavatam, we have this verse in the 11th canto, which discusses the Yuga avatar in Kali Yuga, who is Krishna but also Akrishna. He is black but not black. He is Krishna but he's not black, we could say. And it describes the method of preaching, that is Nam Sankirtan. So this we identify as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is golden in complexion. So he begins his work with glorification of Rupa and Sanatana, who were his elders, and established the movement first in Vrindavan. Jiva Goswami came later. And of course, Rupa Goswami wrote works which are fundamental to our sampradaya by establishing rasa. And Sanatana Goswami wrote a commentary on the 10th canto and also wrote Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the essence of the Bhagavatam. So they established Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy. Gopal Bhatta also wrote, along with Sanatana Goswami, the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and is a contributor to the, we can say, the Sandarbhas themselves. Okay. So Jiva Goswami says he took the work of Gopal Bhatta, but it was incomplete, or we can say disorganized somewhat. Wasn't in a complete form, so he took that work and organized it in a more logical order, and he supplied parts which were missing, and therefore this is the final result that we get, the Sandarbhas. Okay. What is a Sandarbha? It's not a familiar word to us, though it's a common word in Sanskrit. The wise say a Sandarbha is that which must be known and which possesses various types of importance. So it's a work which contains basic principles, in other words, that which we should know about. It's derived from the root Sandarbha, which means to collect together. So a Sandarbha in this context means a collection of verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam which are explained and organized according to different subject matters. So the Sandarbhas deal with Tattva. One subject, of course, is what we call sambandha, or relationship. Technically, relationship means the relationship between the subject and the presentation that is given. So do your words actually signify the subject? So the words should signify a particular topic. So if that is true, they express the topic nicely. That's called sambandha. Of course, we take sambandha in another way also. That is, it's the subject of discussing relationships between what really exists. In other words, Supreme Lord, Jiva, and material energy and the relationship. That's the sambandha also. So the subject of the Sandarbhas, talking about sambandha, what's to be spoken of is Krishna, the Jiva, and Prakriti. And as well, the Abhideya, how do we realize Krishna? What is the method by which we do that, which is bhakti? And what is the final result of our method or Abhideya? That is prema. So these are the subjects which are discussed. As well as that, of course, we have how do we prove this? That's called pramana. So that's what the Tattva Sandarbha does. So in any case, we have these three topics. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains that the Vedic literatures only have three topics: sambandha, abhideya, prayojana, which he doesn't go into detail about, but which are explained in detail in the Sandarbhas. So this of course is these categories are, say, essential not only for spiritual practice, but for any activity we do in the material world. To do any activity, we must have some knowledge to begin with. And through that knowledge, we set up a goal. Once we set up the goal, we devise a method to attain the goal. So all three elements are necessary. If we don't have the knowledge, we can't even establish a goal. If we don't have a goal, we can't do anything. We don't have a method of going anywhere. So all three elements are very, very necessary: the knowledge, the practice, and the goal. And they're all related to each other integrally. In terms of spiritual life, of course, even more necessary. We'll discuss that next. But materially or spiritually, we do have to have all these elements in place. Some devotees, of course, would prefer to say, okay, let's just practice bhakti. Chant the holy name. That's all we have to do. You can do that. In ignorance, you can chant the name of the Lord, as Ajamil did, and you can get some result. Ajamil got destruction of karma. So that much we can do with no knowledge. But if we want prema, then we need the knowledge. If we want to set a goal of prema, we have to have knowledge to do that. And prema for who? Who is Krishna? What is it? What is Krishna? Who is Krishna? We need some knowledge of that. We need a knowledge of what is prema. And based on that goal, then we set up a practice of bhakti. So, therefore, if we want to get prema, we do have to have all of these elements in place. So, as I said here, we have down here the means of proof. How are we going to get the knowledge of what's what, a practice, and a goal. How do we do that? So therefore, we have to use scripture as the means. In the material world, of course, that is not so. Scripture is not the pramana, it is not the proof. If we quote who is God, and we quote from Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, it's not accepted scientifically. Nobody's going to accept that as a scientist. So, of course, for a spiritual life, we will accept it, but not for in material knowledge. So in the material world, we do have to try to establish knowledge, because the opposite of knowledge is ignorance or illusion. And we know that human beings are subject to different faults which will interrupt our knowledge, give us wrong knowledge. So we're all familiar. There are 4 faults in knowledge. One is called Brahm, which literally means making a mistake. To be more, of course, everything is a mistake in the material world, but specifically here, a mistake means to think something is something else. Scripturally, they usually give the example as we go out in the darkness and we see a snake, and we get frightened. But when we look closer, it's not a snake, it was a rope. So we mistook a rope for a snake. That's Brahm, making a mistake, thinking one thing is something else. So of course, usually we don't make common mistakes like that so often, except if the conditions are not so perfect, like in darkness or whatever, like that. So, but nevertheless, we're subject to this type of mistake. Shankaracharya, of course, uses the same term for the jiva. The jiva makes a big mistake, and he thinks there's a material world. It's not there. That's an illusion also. Actually, only Brahman is there, but jiva makes a mistake, Brahm, and he thinks this world exists, I exist, but only Brahman exists. So this is, for Shankaracharya, the ultimate Brahm, ultimate mistake. So this is one fault of the jiva in getting knowledge. He can mistake one thing for another. Another is karana patava, or limited senses. So our senses have a certain capacity, and beyond that, we can't get knowledge. So the eye has a capacity to see, but if it's dark, we cannot see. If there's a wall, we cannot see through the wall. That's a limitation. If it's very, very small and close, we can't see. So we need a microscope or something. If it's very far away, we cannot see. We need a telescope. So there's automatic limitation of all material senses. Of course, we know that dogs have a different hearing from us. They can hear things we cannot hear. Bees can see differently from us, and they have a different vision of the whole world. So different animals have different limitations on their senses, and human being also. So we should never think that what we perceive and hear, or whatever, is perfect. It's not. It's limited in many ways, simply by being material has a limitation on it. Pramada. And of course, pramada means also crazy. It also means drunk or whatever. But in this case, pramada actually means inattention in terms of knowledge. So it means that we may have a capacity because our sense is within the limits of our senses, but we overlook something because of inattention. It means overlooking things which are possibly visible to us, but our mind is inattentive, so we don't see. That's called pramada, or inattention. Something we don't notice. That, of course, is there in science itself. They observe and observe and observe and observe and make all sorts of theories. But then there's something they didn't even see or think about or whatever, and then suddenly they discover something. So inattention. The fourth one is called vipralipsa, or cheating. This is not to do with the senses, but with the mind. So we perceive correctly, but we report incorrectly because the mind wants to cheat somebody. So this is, of course, shouldn't be done, but actually is done even in science, unfortunately. So we often hear about companies that will hire scientists to make reports on the safety of their product, like cigarettes or cell phones or whatever. But they're supplying money to the scientists. And so the scientists will say, yes, cigarette is safe, smoking is safe, cell phones are safe, see all the scientific evidence we have. But we can't really trust that because those scientists are getting money from the company who's promoting, who makes money out of selling. And if the scientist says, no, this is dangerous, the company goes broke. So they hire scientists to approve their product, basically. So therefore the scientist is prejudiced in one sense. So they're supposed to be objective. That objectivity is clouded by money. And therefore he will come up with a report which favors the cigarette or the cell phone or whatever. So this is common, it's very common in science itself, many spheres. So therefore vipralipsa is also an aspect of getting wrong knowledge. Of course, they may get the correct knowledge, but they may distort it. Or because they do have motives, they just tend to ignore many things and take other facts and not get the complete truth. So these are the problems in gathering knowledge in the material world. We automatically have these four faults. So for material knowledge, this is a problem. And we can take any scientific theory, like a theory of evolution even, and then we can apply these faults and find out that there are limitations there. One limitation of the theory of evolution is we can't see everything directly. We can't see what happened 5 million years ago, or 3 million years ago, or 2 million years ago, or even 1,000 years ago. We cannot see directly, but we're making a theory about all that happened over millions of years up until the present time. So because we can't see, we're subject to fault in that sense, and we have to start theorizing. It could be like this or it could be like that. So we make a theory, that's all. But we can never prove it. So all we can do is take fossils. So fossils are our proof, but even fossils are only some things, maybe 0.01% of the record of all the animals that existed. It's not even of a significant amount. So how could we make a theory based on 0.001% of things and make a theory out of that and think it's correct? So like that, there's so many problems with our human knowledge. All we can do is make theories, but it can be problematic. So if that is the case with material knowledge, what about things we cannot see at all? That is Supreme Lord or the Atma. How do we get knowledge of that? Again, more difficult because we can't even use our senses. So human knowledge, human senses cannot be applied to what is inconceivable. Traditionally, in the Vedic literature, they have a whole series of different pramanas and different groups, like the Nyayakas, the logicians, or the followers of the Puranas, or the Advaitins. They will have different lists of the different types of knowledge. So of course, one is sabda. This means trusted testimony. Ultimately for us, that means scripture. This is the most important one for us. Pratyaksha, of course, means direct sense perception. What we see with our eye, hear with the ear. We get knowledge from that. Anuman means using logical inference based upon pratyaksha to come to some conclusion. Such as, we could see fire, and we know that fire gives off smoke. We can perceive that. So, then we can conclude where there is smoke, there must be fire. That's our inference. Then, if we see something on the mountain that looks like smoke, we will see there must be a fire. This is again Anuman. Logical inference based upon the rule that where there is smoke, there is fire. However, there's a problem here also because there may be smoke there, but the fire may have gone out. It rained, and then smoke is coming up, but there's no fire. So therefore, our conclusion, there's fire at the mountain, is wrong. The fire went out, but the smoke there. Another mistake is that it's not smoke at all, it's a cloud that looks like smoke. And then we have a faulty conclusion again. We make a mistake because our senses say it's a cloud, a smoke, but it's a cloud. Okay. So there's problems with Anuman itself. Other pramanas that are accepted are arsha, which means words of sages. So apart from scripture, sages say something, so okay, we'll accept it as proof. Upaman means similarity. This is accepted by the logicians. A gavaya, which is a wild cow, so to speak, is similar to a cow. So we can get knowledge by saying it's similar. This is similar to that. So when we say a gavaya is similar to a cow, we know what a cow is. We don't know what a gavaya is, but okay, it's like a cow. So we get knowledge by similarity. Something is like something else. So that gives us a type of knowledge. Artapati, conclusion from circumstances. We have certain circumstances and we come to a conclusion. The famous example given is, since he is fat and does not eat during the day, he must eat at night. Circumstance is, he's fat. And we don't see him eating, so then we conclude he must eat at night. Okay. Oops. Abhava, this means absence, non-existence. Not perceiving something. If the senses do not contact an object, you assume that it does not exist at that place. This is the karma mimamsakas. Sambhava, a probability using intelligence. 100 must exist in 1,000. The followers of Purana take this as some sort of proof. Aitihya, traditional statements from unknown speakers. There's a yaksha in the tree, because people have said this. Cheshta. Manu Smriti gives this as a proof also. Knowledge through gestures. So we know that there for deaf people, there's sign language. So this is gesture. We communicate through gesture. You get knowledge through gesture. This is another type of source of knowledge through gestures. Huh? Now these are all a whole series of things, but ultimately if we trace them back, we can trace them backwards and categorize them again. So under Shabda we get Arsha, words of sages, Aitihya, from unknown sources. It can all come under Sabda, testimony. Prataksha is there, and Anuman, under that we have Upaman, Artapati, Abhava, Sambhava, Cheshta, which are all aspects of logical reasoning. Like that. So ultimately we have only 3 pramanas, or proofs, or sources of knowledge. Shabda, testimony, authorized testimony, sense perception, and logic, or inference. But because Prataksha is faulty, has the 4 faults, and Anuman, or inference, is based upon Prataksha, they're both naturally faulty. So therefore, Shabda is the only perfect knowledge. Of course, by Shabda, we mean scriptures, and not the other Shabda. There's another Shabda. That is traditional Shabda, authority. So your textbooks in school are a Shabda for the university. But it's material authority. Newspaper is a Shabda, or an authority for getting knowledge of common events, or internet or whatever. It's just all type of Shabda. We accept it as a Shabda, and we don't think they're going to lie. They're going to tell you the truth, so we accept it. But of course, it's faulty because it's made by human beings. So this Shabda is the perfect Shabda, not created by human beings at all. That we have to accept for gaining spiritual truth, real spiritual knowledge. So this is a famous quote to show that material reasoning is very, very limited. One cannot use material reasoning on those things which are inconceivable or achintya. Inconceivable refers to things beyond prakriti. So anything beyond the material world is inconceivable, and thus we cannot use material reasoning for that and come to a result. Brahma Sutras also say the same thing. Of course, the first it says you have to inquire about Brahman. What is Brahman? Jamadasa yataha, that from which everything comes. How do we know this? We have to rely on Shastra. Shastra Yonatva. Origin of the cause of this knowledge is Shastra. We have to take Upanishads, then we can understand that everything comes from Brahman. On our own, we don't know. So those who accept the Vedic scriptures, fine. Then they have this as their proof for spiritual life. Of course, we also have different scriptures. Which one do we accept? Ideally, they should say the same thing, because they're supposed to be perfect. But we see opposite statements sometimes. How do we solve the contradiction? So therefore, there's a whole series of rules how to solve contradictions in Scripture. One rule is, of the two, Shruti and Smriti, Shruti will be stronger. So we have to explain the Smriti in terms of the Shruti. Yeah. Of course, there's a whole series of things here. From Jaimini, which is Karma Mimamsa philosophy, the order of which is stronger than the other. Shruti is first, which means literal meaning. Then we can start interpreting it. We can start altering the syntax of the grammar, changing it to make it agree with our conclusion. We can refer to other texts. It says this here, so therefore this must mean this. We can interpret it according to our own philosophy, as Shankaracharya does. It must mean this because my philosophy is this, therefore this must mean impersonal Brahman. We can start analyzing the words in terms of etymology. What is the root of the word? And take the root meaning. Such as Brahman means that from which everything spreads out. It means increase. So, all of these are sometimes used so that we can avoid contradiction in the scriptures. But as we go further and further in this list, they become weaker and weaker. So we have to be very careful, because we start interpreting according to our philosophy, then is it true or not? Then everyone can have different conclusions based on their different philosophy. So the closer we stick to the literal meaning, the better. Yeah, this is just so the Shruti, or the direct meaning, is the best, as much as possible. If there is contradiction, we have to start using interpretation of some sort. But the further we go down the list, the weaker or more doubtful it is that it's actually the truth. So this is the system laid out by the acharyas for deriving truth of statements. So we accept the scripture, but if there's contradiction, then we have to use this method. If you look in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there Lord Chaitanya has a whole discussion about direct meaning and indirect meaning. So at best, we accept the direct meaning, which he calls abhida. And if we start using lakshana, or indirect meaning, we can also start making a lot of mistakes and come up with wrong conclusions. So therefore, as much as possible, we stick to the direct meaning. Here's a quote from the Kurma Purana. That logic is approved which produces a meaning not contrary to previous and later parts of the scripture. One should avoid dry logic. So we also have to get the meaning in relationship with other statements in the same text and even statements of other texts. In other words, we're striving for a unified meaning with no contradiction. But to drive that, we should try to take the context of everything. So, the simplest possible fact is simply a word, but words have to be related to each other to give us knowledge, so we make a sentence. But the meaning of the sentence is determined by the grammar. So therefore we have to learn grammar to understand what things mean. And this is part of learning a language. We have to learn the grammar, otherwise we just say words and don't relate them to each other properly. The meaning, there's no meaning. So we have to use grammar. So therefore, to discuss anything, we have to get the meaning. To get the meaning, we have to know the grammar. Once we get the meaning of sentences, then we have to relate sentences to each other, which we call like paragraphs. So we have a whole series of sentences, and they also have to relate to each other and make some sense. So how do we get the sense of all these different statements that come one after the other? So there's also a means of doing that, which is discussed by Jiva Goswami, also by Madhvacharya. So one simple rule is that the beginning and the end of the whole presentation should have the same statement. That's probably, if you take English, I don't know about other languages, I would assume so. In English language, they teach you English language, writing a paragraph. So you start out with a statement, then the rest of the paragraph is explaining that, enlarging in that, and then at the end you summarize by making the same statement, or similar statement again at the end. So that's a normal method of doing things, so people get a clear idea of what you're presenting. So your initial statement is there, your end statement, they more or less correspond to each other. From that we get the main theme, or the main knowledge, the main topic, etc. So that's called upakrama and upasamhara. That statement should be there, beginning and end statement. And from that we get the meaning of a work. So Jiva Goswami actually goes to Bhagavatam, takes the initial statement, end statement of Bhagavatam, and sees how it compares them. They have the same meaning. So that's one thing. Another, within the Bhagavatam or within paragraphs or whatever, statements are there to emphasize an idea. That's called repetition. So we repeat a statement again to make it clear to people. Abhyas. Another method of expressing things is called apurvata, to introduce a subject which was not previously understood. In other words, this makes this knowledge unique. Another is to express what is the goal of this topic. That's called phalam. Another type of sentence is praising the goal. If we get this goal, then what happens? Another type of statement is reasoning, to support your argument or your statement. You say it's like this because of this, this, and this. That's called upapatti. So these are various statements which are related to the main topic or the main theme. So we accept the Vedas as Shabda. Why? We have faith. By studying them somewhat, we have faith that this is true. So we accept the Vedas. However, one other subject is the Vedas are considered, as stronger than Smritis, everything else. The Vedas are distinct because they are considered to be eternal. The same words, the same grammar, everything exactly the same appeared in the previous universe, in the previous universe, in the previous universe. And the same Veda will appear in the next universe, the next universe, the next universe. So the words are eternal. They may appear or disappear, but they're always the same. So that is what Shruti is, the Vedas. Puranas, Mahabharata, etc., are not like that. They're called Smriti. The words are changeable. Vedavyas comes and writes, and he'll write according to that particular yuga. So the words are going to differ every day of Brahma because the events are not exactly the same. Similar, but not exactly the same. So words are going to be changed somewhat. So those works have particular authors. Puranas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Smriti Shastras like Manu Smriti, etc. They have authors. So they're put in the secondary category called Smriti. So a little bit different. So the argument is that Shruti is stronger than Smriti. And this is the argument used by Shankaracharya. Upanishads are part of Shruti. So by taking Upanishads, he proves there's only one Brahman, everything else is illusion. And if Puranas contradict it, no, Shruti is stronger. Upanishad is stronger. So therefore, there's only one Brahman with no form, qualities, and activities. Everything else is illusion. That's his method. However, the Vaishnavacharyas do not agree with this. The words of the Vedas were difficult to understand, difficult to access. So sages like Vyas began to write other works to explain the Vedas. So we have Mahabharata, Puranas. So they're there to explain the meaning of the Shruti, the Vedas, and Upanishads. So therefore, they're another form of the Vedas because they're being explained in another work. So how can they be inferior? So therefore, they should be equal in authority, same strength, not weaker. So, Jiva Goswami explains the word Purana. Purana, of course, can mean an old scripture or about old events or whatever, Purana. But also, it can mean a Purana is that which completes Purana, to make Purna, to make complete the Vedas. By explaining the Vedas, we get completeness. So therefore, the Puranas explain the Vedas, they make them complete. So, if the Puranas complete the Vedas, how can we say that they're inferior? They must be equal. So he gives the example of a gold necklace or whatever, or bracelet. So let's say you have a gold necklace, but it's a little short. How to complete the gold necklace? Make it Purna. So we have to add a gold link or two gold links. The gold links have to be made out of gold to complete the necklace. Same quality. If we make them out of tin or iron, it's no good, it's rejectable. So whatever we do to complete the gold necklace has to be same quality. So the Puranas complete the Vedas, therefore they must be equal in quality, same gold, same authority. So that's the argument he gives. So therefore, we don't take Puranas and Smritis as unequal, they are equal in authority. Which scriptures do we accept? There's always people who come up with new scriptures. They may invent a new scripture or write a new scripture and call it a Purana or whatever. But there are authorized scriptures according to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The breathing of the Lord is the Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva Vedas, the Itihasas, and Puranas. So these are accepted as authorized. And Srimad Bhagavatam itself, then, it says that the Puranas are the fifth Veda, which means, again, equal. They're equal to the Vedas. They're called the Vedas, so they must be equal. So they're the fifth Veda. So that means Mahabharata, Ramayana, 18 Puranas, they are equal to the authority of the Vedas. So, one problem with the Vedas is that they require qualification. If you're a Sudra or a Malaysia, you cannot hear the Vedas or study the Vedas. You have to be Vaishya, Kshatriya, or Brahmana. That's one qualification. Other, of course, then you do have to learn the language, learn the meaning of the words, etc., and get the proper meaning. But the proper meaning is also a little bit difficult to understand because the language is a little bit different from normal Sanskrit. So therefore, it's rather difficult to access the Vedas. The Puranas are easier in grammar. They have more stories, and there's no qualification. Everybody can hear, everybody can recite. You don't have to be a Brahman, Kshatriya, or Vaishya. You can be a Sudra, Malaysia, or whatever. You can hear and recite. So the Puranas are more available to more people. Just as the name of Krishna, available to everybody. We don't have any restrictions. Simultaneously, it doesn't mean because it's open to everybody, it's inferior. No, the Puranas are equal to the Vedas. Meaning is ultimately the same, but easier to understand, open to more people. So this is proper. Okay, so Mahabharata and Puranas, of course, there are other scriptures like Valmiki's Ramayana, etc., are very good, but Vedavyas has also written the Puranas and Mahabharata. So they have a special status because of that, because of Vedavyas. Vedavyas is actually an avatar of the Supreme Lord. So what he writes must be perfect. It cannot be material, cannot have flaws. So therefore, because it's written by Vedavyas, who is an avatar of the Lord, we should accept it as authoritative. So this is just a quotation saying how Vyas is superior. What is understood by Vyas is not understood by Brahma and others. He knows everything. His understanding cannot be approached by anyone. This is from the Padma Purana. So the works of Vedavyas in particular are considered to be very powerful. Some of the works are written by others. So we have the Smriti Shastras, Manu Smriti, Harita Smriti, Yagyavalkya Smriti, written by sages. They're not spoken by the Lord himself directly, but Puranas and Mahabharata directly. Vedavyas, avatar of the Lord, has spoken it. So, though the Puranas are easier to understand, accessible to everybody, still there's a little problem here. One is, of course, the meaning is clear than in the Vedas, but if you're not so intelligent, you may come up with the wrong conclusions, the wrong meanings. You still have to put endeavor into studying the Puranas properly. Another problem is that, of course, parts of the Puranas are missing. And another thing is that different Puranas are meant for different people, and therefore they glorify different devatas. So as well as Vishnu and Krishna, we get glorification of Shiva and Brahma. So this also is confusing for people. So this is a problem with the Puranas. We have 18 major Puranas, or Mahapuranas. They are classified. The Sattvic Puranas prominently glorify Vishnu as supreme. The Rajasic Puranas prominently glorify Brahma as supreme. The Tamasic works glorify Agni and Shiva. Some works are a little bit mixed, and they glorify Saraswati and the Pitras. So we have broadly 3 categories of Puranas, of Mahapuranas. 6 in Sattvagun, 6 Rajagun, and 6 Tamagun. So, they're all written by Vedavyas, but he took this strategy to purify different types of people. Just as Krishna recommends karma yoga for people who are materially attached. For people who are unattached, he recommends jnana yoga. For those who have faith in bhakti, he recommends bhakti. So he gives different methods for different types of people. So similar, Vedavyas recommends worshipping Shiva for people in Tamagun. By that, they become purified. For people in Rajagun, he recommends worshipping Brahma. By that, they become purified. So these people from Tamagun and Rajagun gradually become purified, and they reach Sattvagun. Then they can worship Vishnu. So for people of different qualifications, according to guna, different types of worship. Ultimately, they come to Sattva and they worship Vishnu. So the goal finally is worship Vishnu, but it's an indirect process. That was his strategy in writing 18 Puranas. But of course, confusing for people in the modern world if they're less intelligent. Vedavyas himself was not satisfied. This is explained in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. He wrote all the Puranas, he wrote the Brahma Sutras, he compiled and divided up the Vedas, wrote all that, but still he was dissatisfied. So, Narada Muni came to him and told him, yes, this is too confusing for the people of Kali Yuga. So, based on that, he went into Samadhi, and then he manifested Srimad Bhagavatam as we know it, which is non-different from the Brahma Sutras, non-different from the other Puranas and from the Vedas, but which gives the final conclusion of everything. And has one conclusion, not worship many, just to worship one person, Krishna. So this is how Bhagavatam manifested. So there's a talk here in this verse about Gayatri. It begins with a reference to Gayatri, which represents the meaning of all the Vedas. So what is Gayatri? Of course, Gayatri is, we can say, the essence of the Vedas. First there is Om, that expands into Gayatri mantra, Brahma Gayatri mantra, which expands into all the Vedas. Upanishads are the Gyan Kanda, as opposed to Karma Kanda in the Vedas. So Upanishads speak about rejecting the material world, getting liberation. So they're considered to be superior to the other parts of the Vedas. But the Upanishads are difficult to understand because they are a little bit philosophical. And therefore, Vedavyas wrote the Brahma Sutras to explain the conclusions of Bhagavatam. So the Brahma Sutras, unfortunately, also are difficult to understand because they're in sutra form, very, very condensed statements, like a little outline. So people can misinterpret them. Nevertheless, the meaning of all is the same, whether it's Om, Gayatri Mantra, Vedas, Upanishads, or Brahma Sutras. Same meaning, but still difficult to access. So, Vedavyas wrote Bhagavatam to give the meaning in the clearest possible way of all. He was dissatisfied after doing all of this, writing the Brahma Sutras, compiling the Vedas, etc. So he wrote Bhagavatam on the advice of Narada Muni. So therefore, Bhagavatam becomes the final Praman. This work is most complete. It expresses the meaning of the Brahma Sutras and Mahabharata. The explanation of Gayatri reinforces the meaning of the Vedas. It is the Samveda among the Puranas and has arisen directly from the Lord. So that's why we study Srimad Bhagavatam every day, because this is the final pramana. Instead of studying Upanishads or Vedas or Mahabharata or Ramayana, we study Bhagavatam. So the conclusion of Mahabharata, conclusion of the Vedas, conclusion of the Brahma Sutras, conclusion of the Puranas is all in Bhagavatam. Instead of studying all these works and trying to get the conclusion, go to Bhagavatam. Much simpler. We save time. As I said, the statements at the beginning and statements at the end should coincide. So this is coming at the end of the Bhagavatam. At the beginning of the Bhagavatam, there is reference to Gayatri Mantra. Dhimahi was the word there. References to the Brahma Sutras, Jamadasya Yataha, in the very first verse of Bhagavatam. As we come to the end of the Bhagavatam, again we get similar statement. Srimad Bhagavatam is declared to be the essence of all Vedanta philosophy. One who has felt satisfaction from the sweet rasa will never be attracted to any literature. So this is the conclusion. Bhagavatam is the essence of Vedanta or Brahma Sutras, Upanishads, etc., which was concluded with the essence of the Vedas. So it's all the same ultimately, but we get its clearest form in Srimad Bhagavatam. So, very beginning of Bhagavatam, we have this statement. Though Narada was Sukadev's Paramaguru, because Vyasa was Sukadev's guru and Narada was his guru, the Bhagavatam coming from Sukadev's mouth became more attractive even to Narada and Vyasa. So when Sukadeva was reciting the Bhagavatam to Parikshit, Vyasadeva and Narada were hearing also. So they were also attracted. So for this reason, Sukadeva taught Narada and Vyasa as well as the assembly, because they were attracted. So therefore, when it came from the mouth of Sukha, it became liquid nectar. Somehow it became sweeter simply by the delivery of Sukadeva. Yeah. So, Sukadeva is in the parampara getting his knowledge from Vyasa and Narada, but at the same time, Sukadeva is giving knowledge to Narada and Vyasa because they're listening to his delivery. Okay. Okay, so we have as I talked about, what is the subjects of Bhagavatam? Bhagavatam is the pramana, is the authority. So what is it trying to prove? What is the knowledge it's presenting? So this is, of course, summarized at the end of the Bhagavatam itself in 12:12. Let me offer my reciprocal obeisances unto the son of Vyasadeva, Sukadeva Goswami, who, though fixed in his own bliss with no distractions, became attracted to the pleasing pastimes of Krishna, who is the ultimate Sambandha, he's the ultimate, and mercifully spread Bhagavatam, which describes the goal, Prayojana, and destroys obstacles to attraction. So in other words, Bhagavatam presents Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojana. Like that, as we said at the beginning, all scripture should do that. So it's also presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. So, at the beginning of Bhagavatam also we have a description of Vyasadeva in his samadhi and what inspired him to write Bhagavatam. So he saw Krishna because he was qualified with prema. That's this verse here. Prema is prayojana, Krishna is the ultimate sambandha. Relationship with Krishna is the sambandha. And then Vyasadeva saw Bhakti Yoga, which is the abhidheya. Vyasa Bhakti Yoga to the Lord, which effectively destroys Jiva Samsara, learned of Vyasa, then wrote Bhagavatam for ignorant people. So he had realization of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So this is stated at the beginning, and of course, as I said, stated at the end of the Bhagavatam. That's Upakrama, Upasamhara again. It's stated there in the first canto that Vyasa saw the essential difference between the Lord and the Jiva. This difference is established as the Abhideya and Prayojana. If there's no difference between the Lord and the Jiva, you can't do bhakti, and consequently there's no prema. So in order to have this bhakti and prema as the Abhideya and Prayojana, we have to start distinguishing Lord from Jiva. So that was established in Vyasadev's Samadhi. He saw the Lord there, he saw the Jiva there, as different entities. On the other hand, we do have Mayavad philosophy. In that philosophy, the Jiva is not real, thus there is no bhakti. And Jiva actually is simply a reflection of Brahman, or a fragment of Brahman. And ultimately, by knowledge, Jiva disappears and only Brahman exists. So Jiva becomes Brahman. So this is Mayavad philosophy. And if we have this philosophy that Jiva doesn't exist or is real, then there's no bhakti, there's no prema at all. So this is very counter to conclusion of Bhagavatam, where you have Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So therefore, that's all based upon this Sambandha. Understanding Krishna is supreme, Jiva is his servant. If we don't establish that, nothing else is there. So, our acharyas have defeated the Mayavad conceptions. Of course, not only our acharyas, but in the Madhva Sampradaya and the Ramanuja Sampradaya, they've done a lot of work to defeat this Mayavad conception by quoting not only Puranas, Mahabharata, but Vedanta Sutra and Upanishads themselves. And so by all that, they've rejected this Mayavad conception. So, as I said, the explanation how the Jiva arises is there in Shankar or his followers' philosophy. They have two arguments. One is a reflection, one is somehow cutting up a little bit of Brahman off, which becomes the Jiva. So one is reflection, like we have a reflection of a flower in the water or whatever, so the Jiva is like the reflection, but actually it's not true. And we get rid of the reflection, or the substance of the water, and then they only have the flower left. So that's one type of conception. The other is that a little bit of Brahman somehow gets cut off, and that becomes the Jiva. Conscious like Brahman, but a little bit of it cut off somehow or other. So these are two common things given of how the Jiva exists. But then this is countered by arguments of our acharyas. So, how can Brahman be cut if it is perfect? So, it's cut by some upadi, some covering is there, a covering of ignorance. But then Brahman is supreme. Nothing can influence Brahman. So how can it be affected by anything to become a jiva? So that's the argument. If nothing else exists, how can Brahman get covered by something that doesn't exist? Illusion. Does illusion exist or not? No, it cannot exist. So how can Brahman be covered by anything? Of course, Brahman is supreme anyway. Even if something does exist, Brahman cannot be affected. But Brahman is the only truth. There's nothing else to cover it, or to break off a little bit of it to become the jiva. So this is one argument. And reflection. The reflection of Brahman becomes the jiva. But that original Brahman has no qualities. If it has no qualities or no form, how can it get reflected? We reflect a form. If it has no form, it can't get reflected. So, and of course, what is the reflecting medium? A reflection needs a mirror or some water or something, but only Brahman exists. So what causes this reflection? Huh? So that's another argument. So, Brahman is all-pervading with no form. If it's all-pervading, it can't be reflected because it requires a limitation to get reflected. And of course, if it's all-pervading, there's no such thing as a reflection because it pervades everything. Whatever is to be reflected or whatever is the object is all one, so it can't be divided up into two. Yeah. So if Brahman is invisible, then how can it be reflected and become visible at all? So these are some of the arguments given. Oops. So, difference, that is, jiva is different from Brahman and different from matter. This is stated in scripture. But then we have statements of non-difference. Even in Bhagavatam itself, it says not everything is one. And of course, Upanishads are famous for saying only Brahman exists, nothing else exists. So we have statements of difference, Bheda, and statements of non-difference, Abheda. How do we adjust these statements? All written by Vedavyas. He's writing both things. Huh? So we have to adjust the statement somehow or other because we can't have contradictions. Both cannot be absolutely true, or can they? But nevertheless, we have to explain the contradiction. Huh? So, of course, the Madhvas and the Ramanuja followers, they also try to spend a lot of time trying to explain this, how we have statements of oneness, non-difference in Upanishads and Brahma Sutras, etc. At the same time, we accept difference. So how is it possible? So there's all sorts of arguments that can be given. The arguments that we take is, the argument that we take is it happens. Contradiction or contradictory elements exist simultaneously because of Chinta Shakti of the Lord. Inconceivable Shakti of the Lord can adjust contradictory elements so they can exist together. Huh? So what is impossible? Achintya means inconceivable or impossible. So this Achintya Shakti makes what is impossible possible. So what is contrary can be harmonized. That's what it means. So difference and non-difference can coexist harmoniously by Achintya Shakti of the Lord. So that means, the difference means jiva is different from Brahman. Non-difference is only Brahman exists, or everything is Brahman. So how do we have jiva and Brahman different? Everything is Brahman. How do we consolidate that into one statement? It can happen by Achintya Shakti of the Lord. By doing that, the existence of the jiva does not disappear. At the same time, the unity of the Supreme Lord with everything is also maintained. There's one Brahman. So there's oneness, there's also difference. How possible? Achintya Shakti. Example is given, of course, of the ray of the sun. The jiva is like a particle in the ray of the sun, and the sun itself, or the deity in the sun, is like the Supreme Lord. They are non-different. We cannot really separate them. But at the same time, they are different. The rays are not actually the sun, but without the rays, we don't have the sun also. So they're connected together. They're one, but they're also different. So, the statement in the first canto, Vyasa Bhakti Yoga to the Lord, which effectively destroys Jiva Samsara. Varuna Vyasa then wrote the Bhagavatam for ignorant people. So, the Jiva is there, Supreme Lord is there. The process of connecting Jiva to the Supreme Lord and getting that ignorance is Bhakti Yoga. This is the Abhidheya. Okay. Another point of the Bhagavatam is that Bhagavatam, of course, ultimately is meant to point out Krishna as the final object of worship. But we have 10 topics. That is creation, subcreation, protection, mercy, etc. We have 10 topics mentioned in Bhagavatam. However, we should understand that all these topics are there, the 9 topics are there, to impart highest knowledge of the 10th topic. And all the different stories in the Bhagavatam are meant ultimately to point to Krishna. So we have the 9 topics, but the central topic is Asraya, Krishna. And everything emanates from that, and all these topics emanate from the Asraya. And by hearing these topics, they should lead us back to Krishna again. So that's how the devotee will take the Bhagavatam. So we should not be too distracted by the many topics and think of them as independent things. They're all leading back to Krishna. So for instance, we have Sarga. What is Sarga? Sarga is primary creation. This is Mahavishnu glancing over Prakriti and manifesting Mahatattva, Ahankara, material elements, senses, etc., which form into universes. Primary creation. How does that relate to Krishna or show Krishna's greatness? Mahavishnu is simply an amsa of Narayana in the spiritual world, who is an amsa of Krishna. So ultimately it leads back to Krishna, who's all the greatness of Mahavishnu glancing and producing universes ultimately leads back to Krishna as the final source of everything. Like that. So the same with all the other elements, ultimately leading back to Krishna. So, the 10th topic of Bhagavatam, Asraya, is Krishna. And from all of these things, everything comes. Of course, Sarga, Visarga, etc., all material things. So the whole material creation arises from Krishna. Not only that, of course, Krishna is the Asraya for everything in the spiritual world. So all the forms that exist in the spiritual world, all the forms of Vishnu and the avatar forms, ultimately are under the shelter of Krishna. So both spiritual world and the material world are under Krishna ultimately. So this is the conclusion of Bhagavatam. Okay, any question there?
Thank you, Maharaj. When Sankaracharya was encountering these contradictions in scripture, particularly with Smriti, which disagrees with his philosophy or conclusions, did he offer any harmonization, any reconciliation?
Yeah. His harmonization, one argument is that Shruti is stronger than Smriti. So we have to take the authority of Shruti, which is Upanishads, which is only one Brahman exists. And thus everything should harmonize with that. So we'll interpret all the statements of the Puranas and Bhagavad Gita in terms of one Brahman.
But in terms of direct statements like Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam, so does he just reject those?
Yeah, the whole thing and the whole Bhagavad Gita ultimately are secondary. So we can explain it as preaching to the ignorant people in duality. Ultimately we go into duality and everything merges back into Brahman.
One more. The modern scholars and philosophers, they tend to look at Rig Veda and give emphasis to that. But Krishna
Yeah.
and Bhagavad Gita says among the Vedas are Sama.
Yeah.
So what's the understanding?
So of course, it is true in one sense that Rig Veda is, there was one Veda, and then the Vasudev divided into 4. So we can maybe in that sense say the Rig Veda is the original one, and then it got divided up into 4, which are called the Rig Veda, Atharva, etc., Samveda, etc. Samveda is famous because it involves 7 svaras, which are the basis of music. So it's there and it's to be sung. So in that sense, it's the sweetest Veda. So in that sense, it's the best Veda in that sense. Ultimately, all those Vedas are the same because it's the same knowledge. The Atharva Veda or the Rig Veda or the Yajur or the Sama are ultimately the same knowledge. So the Veda Vyasa divided it up so that Brahmanas didn't have so much trouble in learning one Veda. Otherwise, they had to learn one Veda, which is 4 times as big, which is very difficult. So he divided up, okay, this Brahmana can choose one Veda and learn this one only. Ultimately, same meaning. So some Veda is considered to be wonderful because it can be sung and it becomes very attractive and sweet because of that.
One more. Sometimes the Vedas are described as 3 Veda, three
Yeah,
parts.
Atharva, they miss out the Atharva Veda.
Why is that?
Well, one reason is, it's not explained by the Acharyas, but a common explanation is that the Atharva Veda, superficially, it deals with household activities and curses. So it's kind of a little bit less than the other ones, more material in its conception, whereas the Yajur Veda was meant for chanting mantras and sacrifices.
But we have some Upanishads there, like Gopal Tapani Upanishad.
Yeah. So I said that's a superficial explanation, but because it does deal a lot with material things, the mantras are used for material things, therefore it's put in a lesser category.
But there's no evidence otherwise. Is it?
No.
One last one, Raj. In Srimad Bhagavatam, as you say, the topic is Krishna. Everything is directed towards Krishna. And we hear about the gopis, but Radharani is not mentioned. It's only alluded to. And we have understood from your class before that the goal of Srimad Bhagavatam sometimes is to understand Radha Krishna. So how can we see Radharani in Srimad Bhagavatam?
Yeah. So Bhagavatam is the highest scripture, and ultimately it is sweetest because it presents Radha and Krishna and the method to realize them. However, though it does this, it often will hide the truth from unqualified persons. This is also called parokshavad, indirect expression. So things are not always revealed directly, but indirectly. 11th canto of Bhagavatam, in the 11th canto, Krishna tells Uddhava, the sages prefer parokshavad, or indirect expression, and so do I. So in other words, even Krishna's not going to say everything directly, he'll do it a little bit covered up. And there are many examples in the Bhagavatam of that. That the final truth can only be revealed by someone who has bhakti, and particularly acharyas. So that's why we have commentaries on Bhagavatam to reveal everything. So in the Rasa Leela, there we have a description of the gopis and whatever, and then acharyas will point, okay, this is Radha here. Krishna goes off with Radha, and this gopi is Vishaka, and this one is Chandravali, this one is Lalita. So they start naming the gopis based upon certain things, but none of the gopis are actually mentioned there. No names are given in the Bhagavatam, but it's understood through commentaries of acharyas that this one represents this type of gopi, this is this one, like that. So it's somewhat hidden, available to the devotees through the words of the acharyas or their explanations, and hidden from the materialists who will misunderstand and misinterpret.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, you mentioned from the Smriti perspective, there will be a recompilation every time. So is that applied to the Puranas also, Maharaj?
Yeah.
So for example, when you say Bhagavad Puranam, then when the recompilation happens, the same leelas get repeated, or we have to get more leelas?
Yeah. Bhagavata, Mahabharata, everything, Vedavyasa, and every day of Brahma, Krishna will come. And so there'll be a Mahabharata, there'll be a Bhagavatam, but not exactly the same, because some events are going to be different. Some details, main things are the same, philosophy the same, but some details different.
So the Bhagavad that we have now is for this Kali Yuga?
Yes, particularly our Kali Yuga.
So maybe it will change with the other leelas adding in later.
Yeah, we see some differences also. For instance, in Brahma Samhita, it says that Shiva derives from the side of Vishnu, but in Bhagavatam it comes out of his forehead, Brahma's forehead or whatever like that. But it derives differently. His origin is different in the Brahma Samhita, for instance. So there's a little bit, details sometimes are different in different kalpas of Brahma.
Krishna Maharaj,
Hmm.
the phrase Aram Brahmasmi, both Mayavadis and also the Bhakti Yogis also use the same concept. Is that the meaning differs for the Mayavadis and the
I think it must be. If we take Brahman as the absolute, the highest, and we say I, the Jiva, am Brahman, then that's contradiction there. It means I merge into Brahman and become Brahman. So this is Mayavad philosophy, in which there is no bhakti or prema. So obviously we don't accept that. Huh? The way we can explain it, of course, is that Brahman, of course, is a word that which means the greatest, or that which expands, etc., or that which pervades. So the Jiva also is Brahman in the sense that it is non-material, it is conscious, it spreads throughout the body, etc. And that's what's an aspect of Brahman. So the Jiva can be Brahman in that way. In other words,
One more question, if you don't
Wait,
mind.
Prabhu, let Maharaj finish first.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So there are various ways we can come up with an explanation so that the Jiva does not become Brahman or merges into Brahman. And our acharyas give all sorts of explanations for that.
Ask now.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In the Vatma Purana, it says, what is understood by Yasa is not understood by Brahma and others. He knows everything, his understanding cannot be approved by anyone. In Vatma Purana, just a presentation. Now the question is, since we Sudras do not understand all the Vedas, all the Puranas, didn't Yasa put it in black and white in return for the Sudras to understand? And then why did he say that we are not in the platform to understand his understanding?
So in general, Vedavyas wrote the Puranas and Mahabharata for the people of Kali Yuga who can't understand the Vedas and are not qualified for the Vedas. But even then, he said things a little indirectly, because in the Tamasic Puranas he says worship Shiva, and the Rajasic Puranas he says worship Brahma. So in that sense it's a little bit indirect also. So therefore Vedavyas was advised by Narada to write Bhagavatam to make it more clear, and therefore in Bhagavatam conclusion is worship only Krishna. Everybody, whether you're in Tamagun, Rajagun or Sattvagun, worship Krishna only. They'll go through gradual process. However, Bhagavatam is also compared to Mohini avatar, and it hides things from unqualified people. Just as Mohini cheated the demons of the nectar and gave it to the devatas. So Bhagavatam hides the nectar of Bhagavatam from the demons and gives a sweetness to the devotees. So, in other words, certain things are superficially will look like Mayavad philosophy or Karmakanda or yoga or whatever, the third canto and 11th canto, whatever, praising all sorts of things. But if we look closely, then we'll see, no, ultimately everything gets rejected and only bhakti and prema to Krishna are recommended. But it's not hidden from the materialists, but available to those who have devotion. So in this sense, yes, it is a little bit indirect for some people, but if you're a devotee, then you can understand.
What is the Gaudiya understanding with regards to other compilations of Ramayana? For example, Tulsidas Ramayana, Kamba Ramayana. Do we accept that as well, or is there some?
Well, anything that doesn't contradict the original text we can accept. But if they start contradicting, there's a problem. So we have to be very careful about the thing. We try to go back to the original usually.
Maharaj mentioned about the verses of Shruti as eternal, right? Which means the same verses as it is are repeated in every creation. So is this understanding applicable to all the four parts of the Vedas, the Samhitas, Brahmanas?
Yeah, it's all Shruti. Yeah.
Because so the question arises that Upanishads, many of the Upanishads are terms of conversations in a particular setting, in a
Yeah.
particular story form.
Yeah.
So it seems to be like a historical event which is being narrated. So how do we reconcile the
Yeah.
eternity versus the conversational aspect?
Yeah, so the Upanishads are part of the Vedas, so therefore they're also eternal. So those words actually are eternal, and whatever historical events are there are continued. They may be historical, but they're continued with those same words in every universe, in every day of Brahma.
So the same episode
Yeah.
actually historically repeats
Yeah.
itself.
So in one sense it's eternal also, because there's no beginning and end, so those events are eternal. Oh.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Oh.
I just wanted to ask a question. How do we harmonize the words from other scriptures from different religions, such as major religions such as Bible and Quran?
How do we harmonize those? Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, we're not so much interested in doing that in one sense because we accept the Vedas, and our main thing is to harmonize the statements within the Vedic literature itself, or even the statements of Bhagavatam, and come up with a proper conclusion. However, Bhagavatam is a very liberal work in one sense because it accepts Brahman, which is impersonal, Paramama, which is slightly personal, and Bhagavan, which is very personal. So all three aspects of God are presented and said are one. And if we look at various religions of the world, they present God in impersonal way with no form and even no name, but then slightly has some activities like creation and destruction of material world, etc. So somewhere between Brahman and Paramatma, that's the presentation of the Supreme Lord. So we can say, yes, it's also true, but it's also not complete because they don't present the highest form, that is Bhagavan. But nevertheless, it's acceptable as a spiritual goal. That's all.
Maharaj, the Gopas, the cowboys, have a special relationship with Krishna where they can run around and play express.
Yeah.
But higher than that is the Radha-Krishna relationship. So the question is, are male devotees encouraged to develop wholesome relationships with female devotees to get a taste of that Russia?
Oh, yeah.
Camaraderie is very common amongst us,
Yeah.
as in Gopals and Krishna. So what about the Krishna and Radha relationship?
Yeah. Well, actually, material relationships are kind of the opposite. They look similar to the spiritual relationships because we have friendship, we have men and women relationship, we have master-servant relationship, mother-son relationship. It's similar in one sense, but it's actually very different at the same time. The main difference is, one, of course, the jiva's got a spiritual body in the spiritual world, not a material body here. Secondly, is the loving relationship is based upon selfish interest in the material world, and it's based upon no selfish interest in the spiritual world. So it is also quite different in the spiritual world. So by cultivating a relationship in the spiritual world, we cannot cultivate the same relationship in the spiritual world because we're cultivating a material relationship. So rather than do that, we have to stop all material relationships and then establish our spiritual relationship. So if we start cultivating material relationships, it's only going to cause more bondage for us and cover up the spiritual relationship.
Maharaj, now we have, we can see from the literature one. Now from our Gaudiya Sampradaya Acharya also, now for example, when we talk after the Mahaprabhu's Lila, we have all the Goswami's wonderful literature, and so many literatures have been added, and then your compilations and translations also. How do we see this in the next 15, 20 years or 30 years? Like this set of wonderful gem literature, will it go alive with the Smriti in the Parampara, or where do you fit them into the next generation?
Well, the commentaries are simply trying to consolidate or harmonize the meaning of everything. That's basically what the commentaries do. And they're commentaries on original works like Bhagavatam. And therefore, there's no real nothing is being added or something. We're not making a new scripture at all. We're doing things which are following the scripture. And in the future, people can also explain things based upon this. And they also, if it follows properly, then there's no problem. It's all continuous. That's it? Fine. Oh.
As you mentioned, Bhagavatam is more many avatars. See the truth from the materialist. Is other scriptures also the same?
Well, other scriptures, other Puranas, for instance, do not speak so high because they don't get into rasa and Madhurya rasa and Radha and Krishna, so there's less to cover up. To some extent, of course, they may cover up certain things also. As I said, one common method in scripture is parokshavad, to hide the truth a little bit and cover it up so that only qualified people can hear it. So definitely it's there. And thus in Upanishads, things are stated a little bit ambiguously sometimes, and then there's big arguments in different groups about what that means. This is why, because the sages like parokshavad. They like to disguise things so that only qualified people will get the real meaning. So we can say, yes, it exists even in Upanishads. And thus we'll have commentaries on the Upanishads that Shankara uses to support Mayavad and impersonal Brahman. Our acharyas will take the same Upanishad and give a personal commentary. So in this way, the work is covered a little bit. We have to dig to get the real meaning. Okay, I think that's okay. Hare Krishna.
Bhanu Swami Maharaj ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.